Welcome to our deep dive, where we're going to be exploring the fascinating world
Okay.
of sociocultural discourse analysis. So basically, how language, culture, and society are all intertwined.
Right.
You've shared some really thought-provoking articles with me from the Discourse Analyzer AI Toolkit website.
Okay.
And I have to say, I'm intrigued already.
Yeah.
It's like we're about to decode these hidden messages that are embedded in our everyday conversations.
That's a great way to put it. It's not just about analyzing grammar. It's about understanding how language acts as the tool to shape meaning, identities, and even social structures.
It reminds me of that saying, like, we don't just use language.
Yeah.
Language uses us. So where do we even begin to untangle this web of words and culture?
A good starting point is understanding that language is essentially a bridge between our inner thoughts and the social world we inhabit.
Okay.
It's through language that we make sense of our experiences, connect with others, and build our understanding of the world.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does this differ from, say, just analyzing literature or studying linguistics?
It's about going beyond the surface level of what's being said and considering the cultural and social context in which language is used. Think about it this way.
Okay.
The same sentence can have completely different meanings, depending on who's saying it, who they're saying it to, and the social setting.
I see what you mean. It's like how a seemingly simple phrase, like that's interesting, can be interpreted as genuine curiosity, polite disinterest, or even sarcasm, depending on the tone and the context.
Exactly. And that's where sociocultural discourse analysis comes in.
Right.
It gives us the tools to dissect those subtle nuances and understand how meaning is constructed through language in different social situations.
So who are some of the key thinkers who have shaped this field? I know the articles mentioned Vygotsky and his concept of mediation.
Vygotsky is definitely a major figure. His idea of mediation highlights how tools, especially language, shape our perception of the world and our interactions with it. Remember how learning a new skill, like coding, is easier when you have a mentor guiding you? That's Vygotsky's mediation in action. Language becomes the tool. That bridges your understanding.
Wow. That's a great way to illustrate it. It makes you realize how much we rely on language to learn and grow. So besides Vygotsky, who else should we have on our radar?
We can't talk about sociocultural discourse analysis without mentioning Mikhail Bakhtin and his concept of heteroglossia.
Heteroglossia, that sounds complex. Can you break it down for me?
It's like recognizing that every conversation is a symphony of different voices, each with its own perspective and intention.
Think about any discussion you've had recently, whether it's a debate about current events, a work meeting, or even just catching up with friends. There are always different viewpoints, ways of speaking, and intentions behind every word. Bakhtin helps us untangle those threads and understand how those different voices interact. Now that you mention it, it's especially noticeable on social media. It's like this constant battle of viewpoints and voices all vying for attention. So Bakhtin gives us a framework.
Exactly. For understanding that chaos, he provides the tools to analyze how those different voices clash, harmonize, or even try to silence each other. And his concept of the carnivalesque.
The what-esque?
The carnivalesque. It's the idea that humor, satire, and playfulness can be powerful ways to challenge the status quo. Think about how comedians use jokes to point out social absurdities, or how social media memes can become rallying cries for social movements.
Now that you explain it that way, it makes so much sense. It's like how laughter can be a form of resistance.
Right, or a way to subvert dominant narrative.
Precisely. Bakhtin shows us how language can be used, not just to conform, but also to challenge and disrupt. It's a reminder that even in seemingly lighthearted forms of communication, there's often a deeper social commentary at play. This is making me rethink how I interpret everything, from casual conversations to online debates. So are there other key figures we should know about?
Definitely. Del Hymes is another important figure in this field. He developed the speaking model.
The speaking model, which acts as a checklist for dissecting any conversation. So it's less about public speaking and more about analyzing the elements of any conversation.
Exactly. It's like a framework for understanding the context in which language is used. We're talking about the setting, the participants, their intentions, the style of language they use, the social norms they're following. All these factors play into the meaning we create. and interpret.
I'm starting to see how this approach, it can be used to analyze everything. From everyday chats to political speeches, it's like having a new lens for understanding how communication works on a deeper level.
And it's not just about analyzing existing conversations. It's also about understanding how we can use language more effectively to achieve our communicative goals.
Okay, this is already making me rethink my communication style. But before we go any further, tell me about John Gumpers and his work on contextualization cues. I'm completely lost on that one.
Have you ever noticed how a slight change in tone can completely change the meaning of a message? That's exactly what Gumpers was interested in. Those subtle cues, intonation, pacing. Even the choice of words or dialects can signal how we should interpret a message.
I see what you mean, like when someone says, "Oh, that's just great."
Right.
You can tell whether they're genuinely happy or being sarcastic based on their tone of voice.
Exactly. Gumpers called these contextualization cues, and his work highlights how important they are, especially when people from different cultural backgrounds are communicating.
That makes a lot of sense. I've definitely had those awkward moments where I realized I'd completely misinterpreted someone because I didn't understand the cultural context of their communication style.
That's why Gumpers' work is so relevant today, especially in our increasingly interconnected world. It helps us become more aware of those subtle differences in communication and avoid those kinds of misunderstandings.
So we've got Vygotsky, Bakhtin, Himes, and Gumpers. That's quite a lineup of thinkers. It seems like this field is really about understanding how language works on multiple levels, from the words themselves to the cultural and the social context they're embedded in.
That's a great way to summarize it. It's about recognizing that language is more than just a tool for conveying information. It's a powerful force that shapes our thoughts, relationships, and understanding of the world. But before we get too carried away with all the possibilities, there are also some important critiques of this approach that we need to address.
This is already making me reevaluate how I approach every conversation, but now you've got me curious about those critiques. The article, Limitations of the Sociocultural Approach in Discourse Analysis, critiques, mentions some potential downsides.
Yes, and one of the most common critiques is that it can overemphasize the role of social structures in shaping language, potentially downplaying individual choice.
So are we suggesting that we're all just products of our culture with no room for free will? That's a bit unsettling.
It's a good point, and it highlights the importance of considering both sides of the coin. While social structures undoubtedly influence how we use language, individuals also possess agency. We can choose how we express ourselves, even within those constraints.
Okay, that makes me feel a bit better. What other critiques are there?
Another point raised is that combining ideas from so many different fields, linguistics, anthropology, sociology, can sometimes make it hard to create a unified theory. The different theories can clash, making it a bit like trying to fit puzzle pieces from different sets together.
So it's a rich and complex field, but also one that requires careful navigation and critical thinking. We need to be aware of those potential pitfalls as we delve deeper into the theories.
Exactly. It's about being critical consumers of these ideas, not just blindly accepting them, but instead of getting too bogged down in the critiques. Let's shift gears and explore the practical applications of sociocultural discourse analysis. I think you'll find them quite fascinating.
I'm definitely ready to see how this plays out in the real world. Tell me, where can we see this approach being applied?
One of the most prominent areas is in education. Sociocultural discourse analysis helps us understand how classroom dynamics, social interactions, and cultural differences affect how kids learn, both language and social norms. It helps us design teaching methods that truly work.
It seems like it's about more than just teaching grammar and vocabulary then.
You got it. It's about recognizing how language is used to create that learning environment, how interactions between teachers and students can either help or hinder learning, and how cultural differences play a role in the classroom.
That makes a lot of sense. But what about outside of the classroom? Where else is this approach being utilized?
Well, consider the workplace. Remember those tricky office dynamics we mentioned earlier? This field can help decode the power dynamics, shed light on professional identity, and even help us understand organizational culture. It's about recognizing how language shapes those dynamics.
That sounds incredibly useful, especially in today's complex work environments. I'm starting to see how understanding these concepts can help us navigate those situations more effectively. Are there other areas where sociocultural discourse analysis is making waves?
Absolutely. Digital spaces are a hotbed for research in this field. Just think about how social media platforms shape language, create communities, and impact public discourse.
It feels like social media has its own language and a set of rules
Yeah,
that are constantly evolving. It's a whole new frontier of communication.
exactly. And sociocultural discourse analysis gives us the tools to understand how those rules are created, negotiated, and sometimes even broken. We can delve into the complexities of digital communication, from memes and hashtags to online activism and the spread of misinformation.
So it's not just about what people say online, but also about understanding
Precisely. The cultural and social forces that shape those online interactions.
we need to recognize that online spaces are extensions of our offline lives.
Yeah.
And that the same sociocultural forces at play in our offline interactions are also shaping our online experiences.
That's right.
This understanding can help us engage in more meaningful and productive conversations online.
This is all so fascinating. I feel like we're just scratching the surface.
We've definitely only just begun to explore the depths of this field. The more we delve into it, the more we realize how complex and fascinating language truly is. It's a journey that can change how we see the world and our place within it.
I'm definitely feeling inspired to keep learning. This deep dive has opened my eyes to a whole new way of thinking about language and its impact on our lives.
I'm glad to hear it. It's really a fascinating field with so much to offer in terms of understanding how we communicate, how we build relationships, and how we navigate the complexities of culture and society.
Absolutely. And I think it's especially relevant in today's world, where communication is more important than ever. I completely agree. It's essential for us to be mindful of how we use language.
Yeah.
And how our words can impact others.
I think that's a great place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah, we have. It's been a really engaging conversation.
In this first part of our deep dive, and I'm looking forward to continuing our exploration in the next part.
I am too.
Where we can delve deeper into some specific examples and case studies that illustrate these concepts in action.
That sounds great.
Until then, keep those conversations flowing. And remember that every word you speak, every message you type, has the potential to shape the world around you.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for joining us. See you in part 2.
See you then. It's amazing to think about how language acts as this, invisible force shaping our realities, isn't it?
It really is.
But how do researchers actually study these complex dynamics? The methodological approaches in Sociocultural Discourse analysis article you shared delves into that.
I'm ready to get into the nitty-gritty. I'm especially interested in that concept of interactional sociolinguistics that the article mentioned. It sounds like it's all about reading between the lines, which I've always found fascinating.
It's even more nuanced than that. Interactional sociolinguistics, developed by John Gumpers, focuses on those subtle cues we use, often unconsciously, to signal meaning and navigate social relationships. It's about those tiny details that can make all the difference in how a message is received.
Give me an example. I'm all about those. Subtle but powerful communication moments.
Think about how a slight shift in tone can completely change the meaning of a sentence. Like how "that's a great idea" can sound enthusiastic or dripping with sarcasm.
Oh, I know that feeling all too well. I'm a master at detecting sarcasm, maybe because I've been on the receiving end of it a few times. But those subtle cues can be tricky to navigate, especially across cultures.
Absolutely. What's considered polite or appropriate in one culture might be completely different in another. That's what makes interactional sociolinguistics so crucial. Especially as we interact with people from diverse backgrounds, it helps us become more aware of those subtle differences and avoid misinterpretations.
It's like having a cultural decoder ring to help us understand the unspoken rules of communication.
Right.
So besides analyzing those tiny cues, what other methods are used in sociocultural discourse analysis? What about that idea of cultural tools? Does that mean we're talking about hammers and nails?
Not quite. Although language can certainly be used to build things metaphorically, cultural tools refer to the symbolic systems we use to make sense of the world and communicate with each other. These systems can include language itself, but they also encompass things like metaphors, storytelling traditions, nonverbal gestures, and even visual symbols. Think about how a simple thumbs-up emoji can convey approval, encouragement, or even sarcasm, depending on the context.
Wow, I've never thought about it that way. It's like we're surrounded by these invisible cultural tools that shape our perceptions and interactions.
Yeah.
So how do researchers actually go about studying these tools?
One of the most common methods is ethnography.
Ethnography.
Where researchers immerse themselves in a community to understand their language practices in their natural environment.
They're going into the field.
Exactly. It's not just about analyzing texts or recordings, but about observing how people use language in their everyday lives, understanding the social dynamics at play, and even participating in those interactions.
That sounds like an incredible experience. I bet you'd gain some amazing insights from that kind of immersive research.
It really is. It's a powerful way to understand how language is intertwined with culture and how it shapes the way we experience the world. By immersing themselves in a community, researchers can gain a deeper understanding of the nuances and complexities of language that might not be apparent from simply analyzing texts.
This brings us back to something we discussed earlier, language socialization. How does that concept connect to these methods of studying language?
The language socialization is a key aspect of sociocultural discourse analysis. It's the idea that learning a language isn't just about memorizing grammar and vocabulary, but also about absorbing the social and cultural norms that go along with it. It's about learning those unspoken rules of communication that we were discussing earlier.
So it's like language learning is also a form of cultural apprenticeship.
Yeah.
We're learning not just the words, but also the cultural scripts that guide how we use those words.
Exactly. We learn how to use language appropriately in different situations, how to address different people, how to tell a story in a way that resonates with our community, even how to use humor effectively. All of these skills are developed through social interaction.
It makes you realize that communication is so much more than just exchanging information. It's about navigating social relationships, building connections, and expressing our identities.
That's precisely what sociocultural discourse analysis helps us understand. It's about seeing language as a social practice, as a way of being in the world. And it's about recognizing how language is used, not just to reflect reality, but also to create it.
This is all so mind-blowing. It feels like we're peeling back the layers of everyday communication and discovering all these hidden complexities.
It's like we're uncovering the secret code that underlies how we connect with each other and make sense of our shared world. But remember those critiques we touched on earlier.
Right.
It's important to remember that even with these powerful tools, there's a need to maintain balance, recognizing individual agency and appreciating the nuances within and between cultures.
That's a great point. It's a reminder that while we can gain incredible insights from sociocultural discourse analysis, it's important to approach it with a critical eye. And a healthy dose of humility. Now that we've explored these fascinating research methods, I'm eager to see how they're being applied in real-world situations. The article you shared highlighted some interesting applications.
It's one thing to understand the theory, but it's even more exciting to see how these ideas translate into tangible change and improved communication.
Exactly. Let's dive into those applications and see how this approach is making a difference in various fields. I'm really eager to see how these research methods translate into real-world applications. Where are we seeing sociocultural discourse analysis make a tangible impact?
Well, one area where it's proving incredibly valuable is education. Remember that speaking model from Del Hines that we discussed earlier?
The one that acts as a checklist for dissecting conversations.
Yes. Researchers are using that model to understand the dynamics of classroom communication. For instance, they might analyze how teachers use different types of questions to engage students from diverse backgrounds, or how the physical layout of the classroom impacts communication patterns. It's about recognizing that the classroom is a unique ecosystem of communication.
So it's not just about the words themselves, but about understanding how those words are delivered, received and interpreted within that specific environment.
Exactly. It's about understanding the entire context. And what's really exciting is that these insights aren't just for observation. Educators can use this knowledge to make positive changes in their classrooms. For example, if a study finds that certain communication patterns are marginalizing some students, teachers can adjust their approach to create a more inclusive learning environment.
That's what I love about this field. It's not just theoretical. It's about using research to promote positive change and better communication.
Absolutely.
And the applications extend far beyond the classroom. The workplace is another area where sociocultural discourse analysis is proving incredibly insightful.
Yeah, I can see that.
Office dynamics can be so complex and often rely on unspoken rules and subtle cues.
That's where this approach really shines. It can help us decode those unspoken rules and understand how language is used to navigate power dynamics. For example, researchers might analyze language used in performance reviews to understand how gender dynamics influence evaluations, or they might look at how different communication styles are perceived in various work cultures.
It's like giving employees a new set of lenses to see the hidden structures of the workplace and understand how communication impacts those structures.
And by understanding those structures, we can start to identify areas where communication can be improved, leading to more equitable and inclusive work environments.
This is all so fascinating. I'm seeing how these principles can be applied in so many different areas of life. What about the digital world? The article mentioned digital discourse analysis. What are some examples of how this approach is being used to understand online communication?
Think about online communities. They have their own unique language, norms, and ways of interacting. Sociocultural discourse analysis can help us understand how those dynamics work. For example, a study might analyze how language is used to foster a sense of belonging in an online support group, or how different communication styles contribute to conflict or consensus in online forums.
That makes a lot of sense. Like each online community has its own culture. And understanding those cultural nuances is crucial for navigating those spaces effectively.
And this approach can also be applied to understanding the darker side of online communication, like the spread of misinformation or online harassment. By analyzing the language used in these contexts, we can gain insights into the motivations behind these behaviors and develop strategies to counter them.
It's like we're using language as a tool to not only understand the world, but also to shape it for the better.
That's a powerful way to put it.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey, and I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on how language works in the real world.
It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you. Sociocultural discourse analysis is a rich and evolving field, and the more we learn about it, the more we appreciate the complexities of communication and the power of language to shape our individual and collective experiences.
I completely agree. This conversation has really highlighted how much goes on beneath the surface of our everyday interactions, and it's given me so much to think about in terms of how I communicate and how I interpret the language around me.
It's an ongoing journey of discovery, and I encourage everyone listening to keep exploring these ideas and to approach communication with a sense of curiosity and awareness.
That's a great takeaway. So to all our listeners out there, I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity about the fascinating world of sociocultural discourse analysis. Keep those conversations flowing. And remember that every word you speak, every message you type, has the potential to shape the world around you. Thanks for joining us.